Hi everyone, it's Elise from Kit and Clouder, and in this video tutorial today we're going to go through on starting to break down how we create colour blends. Now when we work with alcohol markers, the great thing about them is that they blend really seamlessly together to create colours. Typically when we create a colour, we go through having to show highlight, midtone and shadow, and we just went through this in our previous video on light source. So when we're creating that colour blend, we want to be able to show that light source effect on an object. So when we colour with markers, we want to use a minimum of 3 markers to create one colour. We want a highlight marker, a midtone marker and a shadow marker. And that's what I wanted to go through in this video tutorial to start to break that down for you. You should have your exercise sheet all ready to print it out and ready to go. Now this theory is applicable to any marker brand that you're using as well. We'll go through firstly the Copic numbering system because this is the most popular brand marker that's used worldwide. But in your booklet you also have Spectrum, Noir and Promarker information. And this can be applied to any marker brand at all. It doesn't just have to be these 3 brands. Okay, so you've got your exercise sheet in front of you. And we're just going to run through what we're talking about here. Now we're breaking down each of those 3 types of markers that we spoke about before. Highlight, midtone and shadow. Now the highlight is the lightest part of an object. It's where the sun or the light rays hit first. Now typically if we're using the Copic numbering system, now you should have read all about this in the information sheet in your class on how the numbering system works, but typically that second number on the marker is the most important. And this is what gives us a clue whether a marker is highlight, midtone or shadow. Now with the Copic range, typically any marker ending between 0 and 3 is going to be a highlight marker. Now this is applicable to Spectrum Noir markers as well. They do have a numbering system which is quite similar to Copic. Same with the MEPC markers if you use those as well. But there are some exceptions to the rule. And I'll show you that in a moment. It's really important to have your colour charts made up. We do go through this in the booklet as well. Do up a colour chart with the markers that you own because it will show you visually what marker is going to be lighter or darker than another marker. So you can have a little bit of a clue for when you start to pick markers out to use. Okay, so if we know that any marker ending between 0 and 3 is going to be a highlight, let's go and pick some of those out of your stash. Now your markers that you're using here today might be a little bit different from mine, but that's totally okay because you can now take that choice to go and pick what you've got that's going to suit. And you might not have enough markers to do all 5 of each triangle in each section as well. So just do what you have available. Now I'm just going to go ahead and pick a whole bunch of markers. I've got here my B000. Now my B000 ends in a 0 here. It's nice and light. So what I'm going to do is just pop in and colour up my triangle. Now in the classroom we go through what the rest of the numbers and the letters mean. So the letter is your colour family. So B for blue, R for red. It's quite self-explanatory there, which is nice and easy. The first number that we have on the marker is your colour tone. So I've got V12. Now the lower that first number, typically the brighter and more primary the colour is. The higher, so if I get up to my B90s, the more grey that colour is going to have. So it's typically a deeper colour overall. And then that last number, so I've got here B12, so it ends in a 2. That's telling me whether it's highlight, midtone or shadow. So we're now working in the highlights, anything ending between 0 and 3. So my 2 absolutely falls between that. So that's going to be another highlight marker. So I'm just going in and adding that to one of my triangles. YG23, now this is a yellow-green, which is what the YG stands for. It ends in the first number, is a 2, so it's not super duper bright like a 0 or a 1, but it's still quite light. And then I've got a 3. So that's just on the cusp of still being a highlight marker. I'm going to use here next R20, so that's in my reds. And it doesn't have to be neat, this is just so you can have a bit of a play. And I've got here, my last is a Spectrum Noir colour, I've got IB2. Now the 2 falls between that bracket, so it's going to be nice and light. I'm just shading that in. Now these bullet tips are a little bit harder to get nice and smooth. We do go through that in our next video on blending. Now I mentioned before some exceptions to the rule. Now with Spectrum Noir, so we've got there that IB2 that we just used, and you can see that was a nice and light colour. However, not all of the Spectrum Noir markers go from 0 right the way up through to either a 9 or a 10. In Spectrum Noir they go up to 10, in Copic they go up to 9. Some of them only go up to say 3. So for example, in the LVs, we've got LV 1, 2 and 3. Because there's only 3 markers there, they are your highlight, midtone and shadow respectively. So I'm just going to colour on the side here. You can see here LV3, that's very, very dark. So in this case, we'd use the LV1 as the highlight, LV2 as the midtone, and LV3 as the shadow. And when you've got that colour blend chart all made up, that makes sense when you look at it. It's a very easy visually to see that. So when you're using your Spectrum Noirs or any other brand than Copic, just be mindful that your numbering system might be a little bit different. So you might need to just test each marker before you use them. A very easy way to do that is just to grab your markers out, and I've just got here TB8 and TB5. Now if this was say a Promarker that doesn't have numbers, this would apply to you. I've just got the 2 markers here, and I'm just going to do a little scribble. Now that's my TB5, and a little scribble of this one here, and that's my TB8. Now I can see just from doing that little scribble which one's darker than the other. The 8 is darker than the 5. So even if I didn't have my numbering system there, if I was using a marker brand that didn't have this, I can easily see which one is going to be darker just by doing a little test swatch. Coming down into your midtone here. So the midtone is typically the true color of an object. It's equal parts between the highlight and shadow. So typically with the Copic numbering system, that's going to be anything ending between 4 and 6. So for example, I can go and grab here my BV04, that's definitely going to fall within that midtone range. So I just want you to go to your markers and pick something out that's going to be a midtone. You don't have to colour neatly here, just get your colour down on the page so we can see that nice and clearly. Fill in each triangle. V15 for me next. This is going to be a lot darker than the V12 that was above. And you can even write the colours next to them. So I'm just writing that this is a V15 so I can see which colours I've used. BV04 and I used V12 at the top, B000. It's a good way so you can visually see which markers sort of fall between those categories. Now if you're using a different marker brand, you can do the swatches like what we talked about earlier. So you can just pick a few markers, work out what's lighter, what's darker, and what's a midtone. Typically when we create a color blend, a good idea is to start by picking a midtone color because that's the true color of an object, and then trying to pick a marker that's a little bit lighter and a marker that's a little bit darker. And that way, that's a really good way to create your color blend. You've gone from midtone, then showing the highlight, and then showing the shadow. Got here my Spectrum Noir markers here, staying between the standard color family rules, and I'm just using TB5. And you can see all these markers are just a little bit darker than your highlight ones that you started with there. So we're jumping up through, we've gone from lightest, coming a little bit darker, and now we're going to go a little bit darker again into our shadows. So the shadows are where the sun or the light rays hit last, and it's the darkest part of the object. It's what we use to show the distance between objects as well. So with the Copic system, we typically use markers ending between 7 and 9. With Spectrum Noir, like I said before, that goes all the way up to 10 as well. I've got B18, so that ends in an 8, so that's quite a high marker. So going to pop that into my shadow area. And just use what you already have in your marker stash. You don't need to use the same colours that I do. It's just a good exercise at getting used to picking colours that you own. BV17 is next. Again, so that ends in a 7, so it's ending between the 7 to 9. So it's my shadow colour. BG57. G29, so it's ending in a 9. So for Copics, that's the darkest in the range that we go up to. Typically, higher the first number and higher the second number, that's going to give you the darkest in the whole color family. So G99 is the highest in both first and second number, and that's the darkest green color. Same in the blues, B99, that's our darkest overall. So if you want really strong shadows, I jump right up to your very darkest. So I've got B18, BV17, I've got my BG57 and G29, and let's jump into our Spectrum Noirs. I'm going to grab TB8. Okay, so you can see here that these markers are considerably darker again. So we've gone light, middle, dark, and that's how we pick the colors out. Now coming into the bottom part of the exercise sheet, and we're going to combine everything we've just learned to choose some markers for a color blend. Now when we do this, we're going to keep within the same color family, and I want you to keep within the same first number to make it nice and easy. So for example, if you decide you're going to work in the BG family and you're going to work with the 40s, stick with all the BG 40s. And then you can choose your highlight, midtone and shadow colors from there. I'm going to be using my YROs here to start with. And if you like to keep the rule that we spoke about earlier, you can even start with your midtone color. So I'm going to pick, say, YR04 here. So it's a good midtone, it's nice and bright. So I know that I need a marker darker than this for my shadow colors. And I've actually got YR07 here. So I've got my YR04, I'm going to pop that down. YR07 is the next darkest color, and that ends between 7 and 9. So it's going to make us a good shadow marker. And I need markers that are lighter. Now I'm going to pick here YR000. So that ends in between 0 and 3, so it's a highlight color. Now I've got 3 markers there ready to go. Now in your booklet we explain the importance of sometimes you'll add in more colors to a color blend. So 3 is your minimum. Now in the Copic chart they actually make YR02. Now this color would slot in between these two here to give us 4 markers in the color blend. Now the reason why we would use more markers in a run is that there's less of a gap between them. It actually makes it easier for us to blend. I'm just going to show you this really quick. I'm just going to scribble all over my page here. You don't have to do this step with me. I just wanted to show you what I mean. I'm going to start with YR04. So that's just that mid-tone color. And I'm showing you how I would blend this with my YR000. So if I'm blending out there, now you can notice I'm blending, I'm really trying to get that smooth. There's a big jump between this color and this color here, and you can see that. Even though that's a mid-tone and this is a highlight, I'm still getting a really big jump between the markers, and it wasn't very smooth blend. So if I bring back my YR04 and I use that YR02 that was available, and I blend this through, and then I pop down into my YR000. Now that transition is a lot smoother, and that's because I've just added in an extra color to bridge the gap between the markers. So sometimes if there's more colors available in a run, it will actually be easier for you to blend out than just using 3. So that's a really good tip, because I know a lot of people actually teach, a beginner's blend uses say 2 or 3 colors only, but it's actually easier to add more in if they're available. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes there's only 3 markers in a run and then you're kind of trying to blend those out. But if they are there, try and use them for a smoother blend. So I've grabbed all those markers out like we did before, and this is how I want you to do this exercise. Start with a color family. So I've got my YRs. I've picked YR000 first. That's my highlight marker. You can start with your mid-tone if you like as well. And you can even write in the name of each color that you're using. My next darkest color would be YR02. I've already explained how the color families with this one work and how we're doing the blending. So just keep that in mind when you choose your colors. You might want to take it right back down to the basics and choose a mid-tone and choose the colors either side. I've got my YR04 next. And then my YR07, which is that shadow color. It's a lot darker. So, highlight colors, mid-tone color, and a shadow color. I've got all I need to create the blend. And now I'm going to do just that. I'm going to create the color blend in the middle. Now we haven't yet gone through the blending video, so please don't focus too much on making sure this is nice and smooth. You're just laying the color down so you can see how these colors all work together. I'm going to start with my darkest color first. Just add it along the side here. Coming into my mid-tone color, which is YR04, I'm coming back over the YR07, extending up. Again, if you've got a line between the colors, don't worry, because we're going to go over blending in the next video. YR02, extending further out again. And then my YR000 through the lightest area only. So you can see we've got a good color blend there. We show the lightest part, which is the highlight, come into your mid-tone, and then the darkest, which is your shadow areas. So you've successfully pulled off your highlight, mid-tone, and shadow to show where the light would affect an object based on the previous exercises that we've done. I'd like for you to go ahead and do the rest of the circles here. Now you may have some color blends which use only 3 markers. You may have some that even use 5. And if that's the case, you can even split some of these. You could even do 6 markers, split them up and add that other color in. In the next video, we're going to go ahead on how to do some smooth blending as well. So you can even just come back to this exercise after doing that if you want to create a whole sheet of these colors as well. This is a really good exercise if you've got a color journal. I know a few people when they start out coloring like to have a little journal and keep a record of color blends. So at the top, what we went through earlier, these are great little visual cues. So have them in your journal so you can remember how we pick markers, how we need highlight, midtone, and shadow. And then you can do a whole bunch of these color blends using that theory below. So you can use them and draw on them as inspiration. In the class booklet, you'll see there's a whole page of color blends that are my personal favorites as well. Some of them are a little bit tricky because we start to change around that first number, but the second number always makes sure we have highlight, midtone, and shadow. You could even try practicing some of my favorite color blends and making these up as well, so you can start to understand why I've chosen the markers I have. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.